There was a sound that rose up out of the back rooms of black neighborhoods in the 1950s that you don't hear anymore. Not the sound of a church choir, though that was close. Not the sound of a kitchen on Sunday morning, though that was close too. It was something in between. Something warmer. Something that smelled like pressing combs and bergamot and Dixie Peach and singed hair and goodness. Something that sounded like women laughing. Really laughing. The way women only laugh when there are no men around to make them behave. It was the Black Beauty Parlor. And if you were a little girl in 1955, standing at the door in your white anklet socks while your mother went in, you already knew. You already understood, even without the words for it, that this place was different. That something sacred happened behind those glass windows painted with somebody's name in gold letters. That the women who came out of that door, pressing their lips together, touching the back of their hair, standing a little straighter, had gone in for more than a wash and a set. They had gone in to be restored. The Black Beauty Parlor of the 1950s was not a luxury. For many women it was the only place in the world that belonged entirely to them. A place where nobody called them by the wrong name. Nobody looked through them. Nobody asked them to be smaller or quieter or less. Inside those walls they were the main character, every single one of them. And now those parlors are almost entirely gone. The secrets they kept, the techniques they passed down, the rituals that defined a generation of black womanhood, vanished, faded like the smell of pressing oil on a hot August Saturday. Today we're bringing them back. Every last one. Hey family, I'm James. And today we are going back to the Black Beauty Parlors of the 1950s. Those small, fragrant, miraculous rooms that shaped not just how black women looked, but how they carried themselves through a world that was not always kind to them. Now, if this is your first time joining us here, I need you to do something for me before we get any further. Hit that subscribe button. Ring that bell. We are building a family here. Folks who remember and folks who want to remember what was almost lost. So go on and do that, and then come right back. Because what I'm about to tell you, some of it you may remember, and some of it is going to take you somewhere you haven't been in a long, long time. Let's get into it. Number 1. The pressing comb. Before there was a relaxer, before there was a perm, before there was anything that came in a box with a picture of a smiling woman on the front, there was the pressing comb. And if you know, you know. That fine-toothed metal comb, sitting in the open flame of a gas stove or nestled in a special electric heating unit on the counter, getting hot enough to do the Lord's work. Miss Odessa, or whoever your neighborhood's Odessa was, would pick it up with a folded cloth, test the heat against a piece of brown paper bag, and then lean in with the authority of a surgeon. The sound it made against oiled hair is a sound I can still hear in my sleep. That soft, clean sizzle, the steam rising up toward the ceiling, and the result, that smooth, gleaming, perfectly laid hair that somehow held through a Sunday service, a fish fry, and half of Monday, was not just cosmetic. It was a statement. It said, I am cared for. I am worth the time. Every little girl who sat in that chair and came out looking like her mother understood something wordless about dignity. The pressing comb didn't just straighten hair, it passed something down. Number 2. The hot towel treatment. Now in the parlors that had a little extra to them, the ones run by women who had studied, who had their cosmetology license framed right there on the wall, they did something before anything else that you do not see anymore. They took a towel, a good clean white towel, soaked it in water just below boiling, wrung it out just enough so it wouldn't scald, and they wrapped it around a woman's head and sat her under the dryer hood for 10 minutes. 10 minutes of heat opening every pore on the scalp, softening the hair shaft, preparing the whole crown of the head to receive what was coming next. It was medical in its precision, but it felt like mercy. Women who came in tight from the week, from the job that didn't pay them right, from the walk that required they keep their eyes down, from the children and the husband and the whole weight of running a household on nothing. Those women sat under that hot towel and something left them. Something let go. The parlor knew what it was doing. It wasn't just about the hair. It was about the 20 minutes before the hair where a woman got to be nothing but warm. Number 3. Bergamot hair and scalp conditioner. If you walked into a Black Beauty Parlor in 1955 and closed your eyes, you could pick out bergamot from everything else in the room. It had a smell that was green and a little sweet and a little medicinal all at once. Not heavy like Murray's. Not light like the Dixie Peach. It was right in the middle, and every stylist had her own relationship with it. Some mixed it with petroleum jelly. Some applied it hot, directly to the scalp, working it in with the pads of their fingers in small circles that felt like nothing so much as being claimed. Bergamot was understood to be a treatment, not just a product. You put it on a dry scalp and it answered back. Women would ask for it by name. "Give me some of that bergamot, Miss Ruby." And Miss Ruby would nod like a pharmacist filling a prescription. It was practical. It was cultural. And it smelled like every memory a black woman over 60 carries somewhere in the back of her head when she closes her eyes and thinks about her mother's Saturday mornings. Number 4. The Appointment Book. The appointment book in a black beauty parlor of the 1950s was not just a scheduling tool. It was a social document. It was a record of the neighborhood. Miss Lillian kept hers in a black composition notebook behind the front station, and she knew every client's name, every client's hair type, every client's standing appointment, and this is the part they don't tell you, every client's business. Not in a malicious way. In the way that a woman who sees you every 2 weeks for 20 years builds up a picture of your life that your own pastor doesn't have. She knew when your husband started coming home late. She knew when your daughter got in trouble. She knew when the family across the street sold their house to a white couple and what that meant for the block. The appointment book was just the visible record. The real record was kept in the stylist's memory, filed carefully, never misused, always available if you needed someone to ask, "Now what happened with that baby? How did that turn out?" The parlor held the neighborhood's stories the way a church holds its hymns, with reverence and from memory. Number 5. The tin of Royal Crown hairdressing. Royal Crown. That flat green tin with the gold lettering. Child, let me tell you something about that tin. You could find one in almost every black home in America in the 1950s, but it had a different life in the beauty parlor than it did at home. At home, somebody used the tip of a finger to scoop a little and rub it through. In the parlor, it became an ingredient. Part of a process, part of a formula that each stylist had developed through years of working with the hair that walked through her door. Some would warm it slightly by setting the tin near the dryer. Some mixed it with a touch of castor oil and applied it to freshly washed edges before laying them down with a soft brush and a silk scarf tied tight for the time it took to dry. Royal Crown was not glamorous. The tin was plain. The smell was direct. But what it produced, those smooth, kissed-down edges, those neat little swirls at the temple that looked like they had been drawn there by a patient hand, that was glamorous. That was the alchemy of the whole thing. Plain ingredients. Extraordinary results. Hands that knew exactly what they were doing. Number 6. The dryer hoods and what happened under them. The hooded dryer chairs lined up along the back wall of a black beauty parlor in the 1950s were not just drying equipment. They were confession booths. 4 women sitting side by side under those dome-shaped hoods. The roar of warm air making it just difficult enough to hear so that you had to lean close, put your mouth near someone's ear, let your voice drop. That was where the real conversation happened. Women said things under the dryer that they would never say in open air. They whispered about marriages. They made decisions. They planned things. They laughed until the tears ran and the set almost broke. Back in those days, the dryer section was its own geography, a country with its own rules. You entered it with a magazine, usually an Ebony or a Jet, and you came out knowing something you didn't know when you went in. The stylist understood this. She kept the waiting strategic. She set a timer but sometimes walked by and bumped it back another 10 minutes if she could tell the conversation wasn't finished. That was wisdom. That was service. That was something you cannot put on a price list. Now, before we keep going, family, I want to stop right here and ask you something. Because I know a lot of you watching this today either grew up in that chair or watched your mother and your grandmother sit in it. So I want to know, what do you remember most about going to the beauty parlor when you were coming up? Was it the smell? Was it a woman with a particular name who did your hair like nobody else could? Was it something somebody said to you in that chair that stayed with you? Drop it in the comments right now. I read every single one, and I promise you, somebody else out there has got the exact same memory sitting in their chest. Let's share it. Let's make sure those women get their flowers. Drop it down below and let's keep going. Number 7. Dixie Peach Pomade. There are products that existed simply to do a job, and then there are products that became part of the culture so completely that saying the name out loud is itself an act of remembering. Dixie Peach was the second kind. That yellow jar, the peachy smell that was sweet without being heavy. that said clean and cared for and ready, without ever trying too hard. Stylists in the 1950s used it for everything from finishing edges to giving a shine to a freshly pressed and curled style before the client left the chair. But what made Dixie Peach important in the parlor wasn't just the product. It was the ritual around it. The way a stylist would hold the jar in one hand and apply with the fingertips of the other, working in a direction, with intention, turning a woman toward the mirror before the final touch so she could see herself becoming. You understand me? That moment, the woman looking at herself in the mirror, the stylist standing behind her, both of them looking, that was not incidental. That was the whole point. Dixie Peach was the last note in a song, the period at the end of a sentence that had been building since she walked in the door. Number 8, the roller set. If the pressing comb was power, the roller set was architecture. And the women who did roller sets in those 1950s parlors were engineers who worked in plastic and foam and bobby pins and patience. There was nothing accidental about it. Each section divided with a rat-tail comb, each roller wound with the precision of someone who understood tension, too tight and the curl breaks, too loose and it falls flat before she even gets out the door. The foam rollers came in 3 sizes and each one had a purpose. The tiny ones for the tight curls at the nape and the temple, the medium ones for the body through the crown, the large ones for the soft wave at the top that said grace, and then an hour under the hood, sometimes more, sometimes a whole conversation more, and then the unrolling, always done by the stylist herself, never rushed, each roller pulled free with a twist that preserved the shape, and then the comb out, where the whole structure revealed itself, and the room, without fail, went quiet for a moment. Because something beautiful demands silence for a second before people start talking again. Number 9. The price on the wall. I want to say something about money, because in the black beauty parlors of the 1950s, the prices written on that little chalkboard or index card taped to the mirror told you more about the neighborhood than any newspaper ever could. A wash and set might be $1.50, a press and curl $2, a touch-up a little more. These were not arbitrary numbers. They were calculated by women who understood their clientele, who knew that Mrs. Harris was raising 4 children on what her husband brought home from the plant, who knew that the school teacher down the street was the most financially comfortable woman on the block, but still appreciated not being charged above what the community could bear. The pricing in a black beauty parlor was an act of economic solidarity. The stylist was running a business, yes, paying rent, buying supplies, building a livelihood. But she was also a neighbor. She knew that if she priced herself out of reach, the women who needed her most would go without. And in 1955, going without proper hair care wasn't just cosmetic. It affected how you were treated when you applied for a job. It affected how the world read you when you walked in a door. Miss Rosetta kept her prices humble and her skill extraordinary. That was its own kind of activism. Number 10. The silk scarf and the weekly maintenance. The work of the beauty parlor didn't end when a woman left. The stylist always sent her home with instructions. Wrap it at night. Use this scarf, not a cotton one, a silk one or a satin one because cotton robs the moisture and the shine. Sleep on your side, not your face. Don't let the rain catch you without something over your head. These were not casual suggestions. They were a curriculum, and the women who followed them could stretch a Saturday press and set through the whole of the following week, arriving back at the parlor the next Saturday looking like they had just left the day before. The silk scarf was a secret in plain sight. Every woman who wore one tied at the temples before bed was practicing a discipline handed down from the women who came before her, a code of care that said, "What was done for you with skill and love is worth protecting." The beauty parlor gave you the work. The scarf was the promise you made to keep it. Number 11. The apprentice who swept the floor. In every successful black beauty parlor of the 1950s, there was a girl, usually 15 or 16, sometimes younger if the owner was her aunt or her mother's friend. She swept. She handed pins. She folded the towels still warm from the machine out back. She answered the telephone when Miss Whoever was elbow deep in a set. She was not paid much. Sometimes she was not paid in money at all. Paid instead in instruction, in hours of standing close and watching hands work, in the 1,000 small corrections offered quietly while the other clients talked among themselves. This was how the trade transferred. Not through a classroom, not through a textbook, though by the 1950s there were legitimate cosmetology schools that black women had fought to gain access to. but through proximity. Through showing up and staying and watching until the knowledge moved from the stylist's hands into yours. That girl who swept the floor in 1953 was running her own shop by 1961. The beauty parlor raised its own. It always did. Number 12. Madam C.J. Walker's legacy in every bottle on that shelf. You couldn't step into a black beauty parlor in the 1950s without standing inside the long shadow of Madam C.J. Walker. She had been gone since 1919, but she was everywhere in that room. The idea that a black woman could build a business around black women's hair, a real business, a prosperous business, an empire, that idea lived in every stylist who had mortgaged something to rent her space, painted her name on her window, bought her supplies, and hung her license on the wall. Walker's original, wonderful hair grower was still referenced. Her company's products were still on shelves. But more than the products, her philosophy survived. That black women deserved professional care. That black women's hair was worth the investment of science and skill and commerce, and that the business of that care could and should stay inside the community. Every dollar that went across the counter of a black beauty parlor in 1955 was an echo of an argument Walker had made with her own life 40 years before. The parlor didn't just honor her. The parlor was proof that she had been right. Number 13. The finger wave. The finger wave was older than the 1950s. It had its real glory in the 30s. But the stylists who came of age in the 50s still knew how to do it. Still did it for certain women, certain occasions, certain clients who had never given it up. Because why would you? A good finger wave was a technical marvel, not a tool in sight beyond the comb and the fingers themselves, and a gel made of flaxseed or a commercial setting lotion applied to wet hair. The fingers pressed in, the comb followed, a ridge formed, and then another ridge parallel to it and another, and the pattern built across the scalp like a piece of sculpture. It took 20 minutes of focused attention that allowed for no other thought. The stylist's face close to the work, her breathing even, her fingers moving with the confidence of someone who had done this so many times that the motion was less learned than remembered. Some of the older women in the neighborhood, women who had come up in the Depression and knew what real hard times looked like, never changed their hair after they found a style that suited them. They came in every week for their finger wave, sat in the same chair, talked about the same things, and left looking exactly as they intended to look, not because they had no imagination, because they knew exactly who they were. Number 14. The community board on the back wall. I want you to picture this room. The chairs, the mirrors, the smell of everything we've already talked about. And then I want your eyes to go to the back wall, above the dryer chairs. In most parlors, in most neighborhoods, there was a board back there. Sometimes a corkboard with thumbtacks. Sometimes just a stretch of wall where things got taped up. Cards for local businesses. A notice about the church's building fund. A photograph of someone's daughter who had just gone away to a good college. Spelman, maybe. Or Howard. A flyer for a voter registration drive, placed there with the same casualness as the advertisement for the dentist on 5th Street. That board was the neighborhood's nervous system. Information moved through it. Needs were posted. Help was offered. Nobody called it a community bulletin board. It was just the wall. But it was doing work. That wall connected the women in those chairs to the full life of the block they came from. The needs, the victories, the things being organized, the things being mourned. The beauty parlor was the center because the center had to be somewhere, and it might as well be where all the women already gathered. Number 15. The specialized hot oil treatment. Now, on a slow Thursday, when the appointment book had a gap and a good client came in who deserved something extra, a stylist might offer what she called, depending on what part of the country you were in, a hot oil treatment. Not from a packet, not from a manufacturer's kit. From a bottle she had mixed herself. Olive oil, maybe, or castor oil. Sometimes a little coconut oil if she could get it at the right price, warmed on the stove in the back until it reached the exact temperature that would do what she needed it to do without burning. Applied to the scalp and through the length of the hair with an applicator or her own fingers covered with a plastic cap. The client placed under the dryer for 30 minutes. What came out was a different texture. Supple, grateful, hydrated in a way that changed the way the hair moved for days. This was not a service advertised broadly. It was offered, extended as a form of professional care to women whose hair told the stylist that something had been depleted. Too much heat, too much wind, too little rest, too little water. The stylist read the hair the way a doctor reads an X-ray. She saw what was needed before the client thought to ask. Number 16. The way stylists talk to children in the chair. Child, let me tell you something. There was a particular skill that the best stylists of the 1950s had, and it was almost never talked about because it seemed too small to mention. But it was not small at all. It was the way they talked to the little girls who came in, sitting a child in that tall chair with a booster cushion, putting a cape around shoulders that barely filled it, and beginning the work of washing or pressing or setting hair that the child had probably been tender-headed about since birth. That required more than technique. It required conversation. The best stylists knew that if you talked to a little girl the right way, she relaxed. Not just her shoulders, her whole scalp. And a relaxed scalp cooperated in a way that a tense one simply didn't. So they asked questions, real questions, not baby questions. What did you read this week? What are you fixin' to be when you grow up? What's your teacher's name and is she doing right by you? They treated the child as someone worth knowing, as someone whose answer to the question mattered. And little girls who were treated that way in those chairs grew up believing they mattered. You cannot measure that, but you cannot tell me it didn't do something. Number 17. The pressing comb for special occasions. There was the regular Saturday press, which was the maintenance, the weekly ritual that kept things right. And then there was the special occasion press, which was something altogether different. Graduation, Easter Sunday, a daughter's wedding, a funeral where a woman needed to look like herself, the best version of herself, one last time before she faced a room full of people who would be watching. For these occasions, the stylist added time, added attention. Sometimes she called in a particular trick that she saved. A finishing technique, a specific way of wrapping a curl, a method for achieving a fullness that the regular Saturday press did not require. She might stay late. She might turn away a walk-in so that she could give this client the full weight of her focus. And the woman who sat in that chair for her daughter's wedding morning understood what was happening, understood that she was being given something more than a service. She was being prepared, fortified, sent into one of the most important days of her life, looking like she knew exactly who she was and where she came from. The pressing comb on those mornings was not beauty equipment. It was armor. Number 18. The real gossip and its unspoken rules. Now, the gossip. I know you were waiting for me to get here. Yes, the Black Beauty Parlor of the 1950s was the single most efficient information distribution network in any neighborhood that had one. Nothing moved faster. Nothing was more complete. And here is what people who were not inside those walls did not understand. There were rules, unspoken, never written down, enforced entirely by the shared understanding of women who had grown up knowing that words had consequences. You could talk about things. You could share what you knew. But you did not destroy someone. You did not take a piece of information and sharpen it into a weapon and use it against a woman who was not there to defend herself. The difference between gossip with integrity and gossip without it was understood by every woman in that room, and a stylist who allowed her parlor to become a place of cruelty, real cruelty, the kind designed to harm, would lose her clientele faster than a bad press, because these women were neighbors. Their children went to school together. Their husbands worked the same jobs. The parlor was a circle, and a circle can only stay intact if everyone inside it agrees to protect it. That was just how it was done. Number 19. The Ebony Magazine Ritual. Back in those days, Ebony Magazine in a black beauty parlor was not simply reading material, it was a shared text, a cultural document passed from hand to hand while the dryer hummed and the pressing comb heated, and the conversation moved from one end of the room to the other. Ebony launched in 1945, and by the 1950s it was in every parlor worth its name, and what it showed. Black celebrities, black professionals, black families in beautiful homes with beautiful lives, dressed in good clothes and photographed with respect, was something that existed almost nowhere else in print. The magazines at the white beauty salon down the road did not have pictures of women who looked like these women, but Ebony did. Every page of it. Women would stop in the middle of getting their set combed out and say, "Hand me that ebony back. I wasn't finished with it." The stylist would wait a full extra minute while the client finished the article. That was not inconvenience. That was the parlor understanding that what Ebony offered, that specific proof that black life was full and beautiful and worth documenting, was part of the restoration process, same as the hot oil and the silk scarf and everything else. Number 20. The stylist who was also a counselor. The line between cosmetologist and counselor in the black beauty parlor of the 1950s was not a line at all. It was a smudge. Because women told their stylists things they told nobody else. Not their mothers, not their pastors, not their best friend who might carry the story somewhere it shouldn't go. The stylist was safe in a specific way. She had a professional stake in her client's well-being, she was bound by the ethics of her shop, and she had the particular authority of someone who has touched your head. There is something about allowing another person's hands into your hair that opens a door. The great stylists of the 1950s knew this. They were careful with it. They listened more than they spoke. They offered their own opinion only when asked, and when they offered it with care, the way you handle something fragile and important. Miss Idella on Vine Street didn't just press hair. She had talked women through leaving a bad situation. She had talked women into believing they had more options than they thought. She had talked young women into staying in school when the world was giving them 10 good reasons to quit. She never called it counseling. She would have been embarrassed by the word, but that is what it was. Number 21. The pride of the clean shop. You want to know what a stylist of the 1950s would never forgive? A dirty shop. I mean that the way she meant it, which was total and without exception. The floor swept between every single client. The combs and brushes in barbicide solution, the deep blue antiseptic liquid in those tall, clear jars, cleaned and drying on a clean towel. The mirrors without a streak on them, mirrors you could stand in front of and see yourself clear, which was the point of the mirror in the first place. Fresh towels, folded, stacked, ready. No product bottles with the lids left off. No hair on the sink. No smell in the room except the good smells. The pressing oil, the bergamot, the barbicide, the slight warm smell of the dryers doing their work. This was not vanity. This was a statement about what kind of establishment this was, what kind of woman ran it, and what kind of woman came here to be served. A clean shop was respect made visible. Folks don't maintain things the same way anymore, and that is a shame. Because cleanliness in a place of business used to say something specific. You are worth a clean environment. You are worth the time it takes to make this right before you walk in. Number 22. The Saturday schedule and its sacred rhythm. Saturday in a black beauty parlor in the 1950s was not a work day. It was a ceremony. And like all ceremonies, it had a structure that the participants understood without being told. The first appointments started early, some stylists opening at 7 so that the women who were cooking Sunday dinner and needed to be home by noon could get in, get done, get out looking right. The middle of the day was the full house. Every chair occupied, every dryer running, conversations layering over one another like music in a room with good acoustics. And the late afternoon was for the standing appointments, the loyal women who had been coming on the same Saturday at the same time for 10 years and whose stylists knew their hair the way a musician knows a song they wrote themselves. By evening, when the last client was out the door and the door was locked, the stylist was tired in the way that only comes from doing something all day that you are genuinely good at. Tired the way your grandmother was tired on a Saturday night. Full tired. Earned tired. The kind of tired that lets you sleep without once wondering if the day was worth it. Number 23. The smell of scorched hair and why it meant something. I know this sounds strange, but hear me out. The slight smell of scorched hair in a black beauty parlor of the 1950s was not the smell of a mistake. It was the smell of expertise being applied right at its edge. Because pressing hair with a hot comb operated at a margin. Too cool and the press didn't take. Too hot and the hair broke. The fact that there was a little smoke, that the air carried that specific smell of hot metal meeting treated hair. That was the stylist working right at the limit of what the hair could receive and getting everything it had to give without going past it. A client who smelled that smell and sat still, who trusted the hands behind her, was already experienced enough to know that this was the smell of the work happening correctly. New clients sometimes flinched. The regulars didn't move, because they knew the smell of their stylist's competence. They knew what good pressing smelled like, and they knew the difference between the efficient scorch of a skilled woman and the actual smell of damage, which smelled different, and which Miss Whoever never let happen in her shop. Not once. Number 24. The business owner. Nobody called a business owner. Here is something that I carry with me when I think about these parlors and the women who ran them. In 1955, a black woman who owned her beauty parlor was a business owner. She had a license. She had a lease. She had a payroll, sometimes the apprentice, a shampoo girl, a second stylist if she was doing well enough. She had accounts with suppliers. She had a reputation that was her primary capital, built over years and protected every single day. She was an entrepreneur, but almost nobody used that word about her. In the world outside her shop, she was invisible to the economy in the way that black women's economic contributions were broadly invisible. No articles in the business section of the newspaper, no mention in the Chamber of Commerce, no small business loan that came without a fight. She built everything she had from the $12 she made her first week, and the reputation she earned one satisfied client at a time. And she did it without being celebrated, without being studied, without being named what she actually was. She was a business owner. Say it out loud when you think about her. She deserves the words. Number 25. The last look in the mirror. Every woman who sat in a black beauty parlor chair in the 1950s eventually got to that moment. The stylist finished the last touch, set down the comb, stepped back, and the woman looked at herself in the mirror. Now I need you to understand what that moment actually was, because it was not a small thing dressed up as a small thing. These were women who moved through a world that spent considerable energy telling them, in the law, in the store, in the employer's office, in the look people gave them on the street, that they were worth less than they were. And then they sat in that chair. And they let a skilled woman work on them for an hour or 2 hours or however long it took, and they looked in the mirror, and they saw themselves, really saw themselves. Not the version the world offered back to them, but the true version. The dressed up, taken care of, beautiful, worthy, full version. The stylist standing behind them in that mirror wasn't just a person who had done their hair. She was a witness. She had participated in the restoration. And the woman looking back from that mirror was the woman who was going to walk out that door and back into everything the world had waiting for her. But she was going to walk out, looking like she knew something, looking like she had access to a source of strength that the world could not take away from her, because it lived in her, and in the women who had raised her, and in the shop on the corner where the window was painted with a name in gold letters, and the smell of pressing oil hung in the air like a blessing on a Saturday afternoon. That is what the beauty parlor was. Not a service, not a building. A place where black women told each other every single week, you are worth this. You are worth the time. You are worth the care. You are worth seeing yourself clearly. And we need to remember that. Family, I want to thank you for spending this time with me today. We talked about 25 secrets that lived inside those parlors. The products, the techniques, the rituals, the relationships, the economics, the small and enormous dignities that happened inside those walls every Saturday of every year, throughout an era that most of the world has already forgotten. But not us, not this family. Because remembering is not just nostalgia. Remembering is a way of saying, this happened, and it mattered, and the people who did it were worthy of being known. Those stylists, Miss Odessa and Miss Rosetta and Miss Adela and Miss Ruby and all the women whose names I didn't say because I don't know them, but somebody watching this does. They held their communities together, one appointment at a time. They worked with their hands and their minds and their hearts, and they built something that sustained black women through one of the hardest eras in American history. I think about them often. I hope today made you think about them too. I'll see you next time, family.